Sounds like it.
Okay, let's kick this thing off. Welcome to Pirates Empowering the Transition. I'm Pirate J. I'm a Brisbane and Lismore-based pirate. Those are both extremely appropriate cities to be aboard a pirate ship right now. As we are at least partly Australia-based, I'd like to kick this off with an acknowledgement of country. Although we're not physically gathered together, those of us dialing in from Australia all stand on unceded First Nations land, in my case, Widjabul and Gullible people of the Bundjalung Nation. So I'd like to acknowledge and pay all of our respects to the traditional custodians of the lands and all Aboriginal elders, past, present, and emerging. I'd also like to start by just giving a quick overview of some of the Big Blue Button basics, as I know not everyone is likely to be fully familiar with BBB. It's not all entirely intuitive. For a start, you have this very small icon top left, which is just like a stylized person and a little arrow. That's the icon that minimizes or shows the user list, and then once the user list is displayed, you can click on the speech bubbles public chat to show and hide the public chat next to the user list. Obviously I'm showing a screenshot, Firefox on MS Windows. It's going to look different if you're on a different platform. It's going to look very different if you're on mobile. After the discussion, we'll open the floor to questions. The way we'll work that is if you could please raise your hand. There's a raise hand button in the extreme bottom right, and then I'll know to give you the floor so you can ask your question. Also, if you are invited to speak, if you're intending to raise your hand, please check as you join. There's audio settings that give you a listen-only option. You do not want that. You want to select join with microphone. And then finally, towards the bottom right, there's a blue button here which allows you to toggle between Talking Heads video view and the presentation. So that's the awkward introduction over with. I would also remind you that as I'm going to open the floor to questions at the end, it's very important to raise your hand. I'd like to name check the German Pirate Party, German Pirate Energy Working Group, who are dropping an enormous load of truth and facts on us today, and Pirate Party Australia, Fusion Party Australia, obviously. Vote Fusion. And finally, I'll go around the speakers very quickly. We have Fredo, who is an IT business consultant and coordinator of the German Pirate Energy Working Group.
Hello.
We have Guido, entrepreneur and spokesperson on energy policy for German Pirate Party. We also have my fellow pirate Dave. Hi Dave, down in SA, with much drier feet than me this month.
Indeed. You've definitely suffered the floods, and I managed to avoid all of that down here in Adelaide. So, yes, thank you.
Lucky you. Also, hello both to and from Miles and Sebastian, the chairs of our pirate parties, who are both online, I believe. The aim for today is to cover, we're going to go at a fairly high level, but we're going to cover party policy. We're going to cover how we envision, trying to avoid a 3 degrees warming world. We're going to cover, from Fredo's keynote, the ingredients to shifting politics, to actually getting things, to shift that Overton window. We're going to compare the situation in Germany and Australia. And we're also going to talk, I hope, if we get time, about the ways that we've got so much in common between Fusion, between the Pirate Party in Germany, and just between the whole pirate movement more generally. This is a really exciting time to be talking about energy policy, both in the scary way. We've got a gas-fueled crisis in the Ukraine. We've got the Carmichael coal mine ramping up to maybe be the world's largest coal mine. But also in an opportunities kind of way with the new technologies coming through. We've also got a lot to discuss in terms of the differences in our energy mix and the differences in our situation. One, Australia being a huge island, Germany being embedded with neighbours on all sides and a much more complex grid. And I'm going to steal Fredo's words here that part of the reason for this focus and for this live stream is just an acknowledgement that what we're facing isn't primarily a technical problem. We're facing a problem of power and of gatekeeping by fossil fuel interests. And so it's a political challenge because the electorate's been lied to and been told that we're on the right track. Having said all that, I'll repeat again, vote Pirate, vote Fusion. We're the only party, starting with the roadmap for a quick transition and reskilling and combined environmental and economic rebirth. To warm things up and get us started, I'm going to go around the group, starting with Fredo, and ask you to give me one hope and one fear. Go, Fredo.
My hope would be that a lot of people acknowledge actually what kind of potentials we have with renewable energies. And my fear is that people will procrastinate it again and again, like we did the last decades.
That is a very justifiable fear. Dave, one hope, one fear.
Well, I hope to see Australia seriously getting on board with transition to renewables. We're in an excellent position geographically to accomplish that, not only for our own energy needs, but also to become a major exporter of renewable energy to other countries, such as the pipeline to Singapore that's currently in process, and also potentially delivering through battery technology in the future. So I think that that's probably my greatest point there, and my greatest fear is that invested interests in Australia have tended towards a lot of older voters voting for the parties that endorse the ongoing use of coal and fossil fuels, and that's really that's something that's an economic challenge in the first part, but also their invested interest is corrupting our current government and their stance on the issue. So that's my fear, is that if we re-elect our Liberal Party again, things are going to continue, and we're not going to reach that 2030 deadline for 100% renewables.
Yeah, that is worst case. Thanks, Dave. That leaves you, Guido.
Yeah, my biggest hope is that the many advantages of renewable energy will drive a really fast transition by disruption right now, especially since we see all the problems with fossil fuels very clearly at the moment. And my biggest fear is that those who are currently making the money with energy are going to oppose that and trying to influence politics, as they have done for many, many decades, and trying to at least slow down the development. And that's already happening, and that's my biggest fear, that it's slowing down the development.
Thanks, Guido. And I think, all of us definitely share that fear that vested interests and the Murdoch press and the same lot staying in government are a sort of perfect storm of bad outcomes. But let's focus on the positive, and on that note, I'll hand over to Fredo to take us through it.
So I will introduce you to some basic facts, and later to also some timetables, some relation about costs. So what can you expect from this little presentation is that we have a look on the current energy mix in Germany and Australia, also the existing energy networks and dependencies. Dependencies is a part we just mentioned already with a war going on in Ukraine. Germany, for instance, relies a lot on fossil fuels from Russia. We have a quick look on the potentials for renewable energies. And finally, what are actually the current costs that we are facing in both countries about energy and conversion costs. So it's a bit split. We start with some basic facts, and let's have a look on the energy mix. First of all, there's a little introduction. Nuclear energy, coal, oil and gas, that drive the industrial age so far. Guido has the word to say, actually, civilization and energy is correlative. So, yeah, and we know all about the advantages and disadvantages of this energy forms. The question is why we are still so reliant on fossil fuels. Yeah, so this is the first part, the current energy mix, the potentials and the costs. We are having a look here on a pie chart, which is probably familiar for a lot of people. This is what you will see in presentations by politicians. Germany has this big piece of the cake, 40%, over 40% renewable energy. Looks very good. Let's have a closer look. This is driven by biomass, 7.5%, and solar, nearly 9%, and wind offshore and wind onshore. That's a majority. And then some hydro, not a lot actually, and some others. Looks good so far. So are we on a good path here? In fact, that's not the real picture. So let's have a look on what's actually the real mix, because this is a chart about the power production, electrical power, but the prime energy is of course also with mobility, with heat, and so this is what we can see actually. So from the whole energy which is consumed in Germany, we have about 15% renewable energies right now. So it's not about, yeah, we just have to double a little bit what we have already and then we are fine. No, there is still a long way to go. And we see now the majority here is actually more than 30% oil, a lot of coal still and gas. So, and this part of the pie nuclear will be away in the end of the year, regardless of any political decisions, since we are planning for getting out of nuclear power a long while ago now. So even if for some reasons people would say, let's run them longer, that's not possible since there is the security cycle running out, so they have to get off-grid for at least 2 years, even if you want to run them. Because you also have to, they need new fuel and you have to customize this and a lot of other stuff. So this will be definitely, whatever happens, end this year. And yeah, the more Germany is reliant on fossil fuels. Yeah, here again, you see the mix. So the biggest part is here biomass, as you can see, and biomass is about nearly 9% of the renewables in Germany, and yeah, and then you have things like solar is 1.7% of all the energy mix right now in Germany, nearly nothing. And the potential is enormous. We will see this later. Only the sealed surfaces, which are actually good for harvesting solar energy in Germany, would be more than enough to power Germany. Yeah, what is with Australia? Is Australia on a good path? We have the same picture. Nearly a quarter is already renewable. Looks kind of good as long as we only have a look on the power production. In fact, it's about 7%. And yeah, this is a very simple graphics. You see it's fairly a third, a little bit more is oil, and the others are gas and coal, lignite and black coal. And yeah, so this is the power mix of Australia right now. Yeah, I guess Jane mentioned it. Any questions you have about this, you can ask later then, and also this presentation you will find on the event site. It's already there. I know that especially if you follow us on YouTube, you will not see every of the little details, the sources, which are at the bottom, very small, but don't worry, you can just have a look on the file itself. The PDF is already up there. Yeah, so energy imports and dependencies. How independent are we in our power and the consumer power? So this is what you can see for Germany. Germany has from this is whole of the European Union. So it consumes about 23% of gas. Is this chart? And as you can see, well, about 50% comes from Russia, then 25 Norway, a little bit less Netherlands. Of course, right now there's a process to change this, but this is the current situation. These numbers are from 2019. They're fairly still the same. And if you have a look here, for instance, on whole Europe, you see still Russia has about 30% of all Europe. So you can imagine Spain, Portugal, they don't have a lot. Finland, Estonia, Hungary, Czech Republic, they have 100% gas from Russia. So this is to give you some examples. There is a link to this tool, which is interactive. You can play a little bit with it around. So like in click One Nation, and then you see if you can see any coincidence to that politics, let's say. I don't have that precise data from Australia, but what I found from the government is at least this chart, where you see some inland exports. So the situation is very different. Of course, like with a lot of other resources, Australia is exporting a lot and then import the refined or produced or melted products. So it's with energy more or less the same. You import a lot of oil, and yeah, and refined products. And you export a lot of coal. That's the current situation.
Thanks, Roger.
We have now a look on the potentials and the costs, and then we come back to the, correct, Jay? Yeah, so the potential.
Yes.
With the already sealed areas, as I said, and suitable roofs, house facades which are suitable, Germany can cover more than the current energy needs, only with solar energy. Plus, on top there is, of course, some harvest by wind energy lot and others. The problem is actually only the storage. So how can we power Germany in the time, which can be in the beginning of the year where there's not a lot of wind and not a lot of sun. In Australia, you're really blessed. I will show you a chart. This was mind-blowing for me when I saw this. You have a very uniquely productive spot in the world where you can harvest a lot of solar and wind. Let's have a look on this. This is a world map where you can see here the idle harvest for solar potential and wind, and of course both, which is Australia. So this is really great. Of course, some of the areas are not inhabited, as from what I know about Australia. But yeah, there is a lot of potential for wind and solar. And of course, we are talking always about what is cost efficient. So you can. I'm currently living in Stockholm. Greetings from here. So you can have a lot of solar power here too. Of course, half the year you harvest a lot, half the year not so much. The farm you go in the north, and but these spots are already cost efficient. I think 2018 or so, and there's still a big progress in this because solar panels, for instance, they become cheaper and cheaper every year. I think half the cost every 5 years or something like this. Make your own research about this. It's a lot. And so this is the potential we can harvest. And as I said, I just give you more specific numbers about Germany and have a look now on Germany. So actually, has some wind potential. It's not idle for solar, and that's enough. And we are really industrialized, and we're really living a lot of people on the same spot. Okay. What is the cost situation if we would go in a transition to 100% renewables? We made our own calculations about this, and it is about 2 trillion euro, which is about 3 trillion Australian dollar. This is a lot, but let's have a closer look. In our party program, we say we want to do this until the next 13 years. Actually, it was 14 years since we had elections, so our election program is from last year, but I think it's still possible to do. So until 2035. And this means we have investment of 150 billion annually. And now you have to know that only the import of fossil fuels costs Germany already 100 billion every year. The maintenance and also new building, we wanted to build 40 new gas power plants, for instance, in the next years, is even more. So there are no transition costs. Actually, we just have to make a political decision and a shift to new renewable energies. We can talk about other problems, technical problems, logistic problems, but the financial situation looks very good. This also means, of course, after the transition, you save a lot of money. Maintenance costs for renewables are normally a lot lower than for the conventional power plants, especially nuclear, but also coal, gas, you name it. This means actually the price for energy goes in a conversion line down to zero, more or less. If you have already produced, let's say, investment costs, you have a return on invest after already 7 years for solar roof, for instance, in Germany with the prices. And after this, you got your energy for free. So this is about the costs in Germany. And fun fact, or not so fun, depending on your humor, is if we would do the transition in Germany last 20 years, with the available technical situation 20 years ago, starting from there, of course there's then a progress, maybe a bigger progress than we saw with what we did instead. We could already be done, and probably also with no extra costs. But on the other hand, 20 years ago, everybody who was a professional about energy, not only suppliers, not only those who make the big money, also every journalist who is a professional specialized in this, every politician, all of them were, of course, conventional power plant guys. So this is the struggle we have. But we stay to the costs. Let's have a look for Australia. I was not able actually to get really good numbers about this, but we can estimate there is related to the population and the industry sector, we would have more or less the same costs related to the size. So about 400 billion, which is 750 billion Australian dollars. 400 billion is now here in euro. But since you have a lot better spots for harvesting the energy, the conversion cost should be a lot cheaper. Also, there is an interesting study. If you want to connect a power grid, which is not countrywide as from what I know yet, you could build it for another 100 billion, let's say in 10 years or so 10 billion every year, which would actually connect the different zones very effectively. On the other hand, I'm not very convinced about this, since I think building storage instead and having power islands could be the better way to go. In both ways, it's a lot of money, but if you again bring it in relation to what are the current costs, there is no extra cost from what we can see. And I think this is what we want to do so far. Back to you, Jay.
Thanks, Fredo. Yeah, I mean, it's as you said, we are absolutely blessed. We're in a situation where not only do we have these amazing resources right on our doorstep of solar and wind, enough to power our entire economy, and also for export if we choose to build the infrastructure that's needed for that. And at the same time, we have these incredible opportunities. An example at the moment is there's an Australian company called Tritium, which is over in the United States building out one of their biggest electric vehicle charging networks. And yet, the incumbent government is completely not behind this. We have no support, and the everything that can put the brakes on the transition currently is. What I'd quite like to do is to bring Dave in here and just talk for a moment about the unique challenges that we have here in Australia in terms of geographical size and isolation, and the bulk freight issues, and also the political challenges around the fossil fuel lobby being particularly strong here, because we don't have much of a value add in our export chain, which I think is one of the big differences. In Germany, you've got a very large industrialized base where you're consuming a lot of power, but that's also adding value. Here, we've got a situation where the economy is propped up by what we dig up and ship overseas.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jay. Just highlighting again that Australia is a very, very sparse nation. 90% of our population lives just along a few central parts of our coastline. So for our power grid to work nationally, we need a lot more infrastructure than you do in more concentrated areas of the world. In terms of moving to make renewables more viable, we do have a lot more challenges in rolling out that infrastructure. We need to cover thousands of kilometers of pipeline to be able to get that from one place to another. That, and also the fact that we are an island country, we're completely isolated here, so we don't have the benefits of being able to easily exchange energy with other countries. I mean, we do it obviously. And that's something that's becoming more and more viable, but we are fundamentally at a disadvantage there. In terms of our economic structure, Australia has traditionally had a very, very heavy dependence economically on our mining industry, and that's been one of the biggest things that our incumbent politicians have always pushed when it comes to election time, because there are thousands of jobs. There's whole country towns that literally just turn into ghost towns once the mining operations close shop and move out of the area. We do have very, very different challenges, but it's definitely viable. But I think the infrastructure challenges we face are matched equally by the economic and cultural challenge we have in trying to convince the majority of Australians that it's a better option than what has essentially sustained our economy for the past few decades.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about conviction. I was going to ask you to flip that around for us, either Guido or Fredo, whoever wants to come in, because everything Dave said is absolutely true, but it's slightly depressing. It'd be good to speak to the little circle that we see on the map just above Australia there, and the opportunities that represents as we transition.
You mean opportunities with delivering energy to that area where a lot of people live?
For delivery and trade, yeah.
Actually, I think that transporting energy around the globe is not that good an idea. It's always connected with lots of losses. And we currently have an international craze or international hype for hydrogen. And what I'm always missing there are real calculations about the costs. It's always said that, you have to develop the technology, costs will come down, and it will make sense because we can harvest solar energy for half the cost in Australia or in North Africa. But when you look at the actual numbers, then you see that there are lots of physical limits that cannot be overcome by however much technology you develop. There's things like gas dynamics that dictates how much energy you need to compress hydrogen to a certain pressure, or how much energy you need to cool it down to become a liquid. And when you take all of that into account, then you end up with using so much primary energy to produce and transport the hydrogen that it doesn't make sense anymore. It's cheaper to harvest the energy at the place where you need the energy. So I think the better way for the transition for Australia is to get more of the production into your country. And instead of shipping hydrogen and iron ore, use the hydrogen locally to turn the iron ore into steel.
That makes sense. I was also thinking of the other technology that was in my mind, and I agree that the hydrogen economy is riven with inefficiencies at each conversion step and is kind of crazy. I was wondering about the potentials for HVDC export. That's what was in my mind.
Yeah, that works to some degree, but of course it's also connected with a lot of cost. And you always have to keep in mind how much does it cost to transport the energy versus how much cheaper is it to produce it at a different place. And that's a point where I'm really very, very skeptical about transporting any energy over really long distances. Since you have losses, even if high voltage DC is quite efficient, but that also makes the system more expensive. And it also takes a lot of maintenance. If you have a high voltage DC cable on the seafloor, then it's going to be quite interesting how to fix it if there's a problem with the cable. If it's at a couple thousand meters depth, then that's almost not reachable. It takes a lot of technology to get at the cable to do any repairs, or even to do inspections to make sure that you don't have to repair. But that's all going to add a lot of cost. Where my question is, how much cheaper can the production of the energy be in a different location versus the transport?
All of what just Guido said is very valid. On the other hand, I want to give a little bit of a shift of the perspective here. First of all, I don't know if you all can see this actually in this graphics. Looks very small for you. So this dotted circle around here, dotted line circle, this is where half of the population of the world is living. And as you can see, not the best energy, some of them, yes. I think this is Mongolia or something, which looks actually quite good. Again, optimal. You can harvest renewables, solar, for instance, everywhere. Okay, then there is already a project going on with a landline. And then in the end, we're talking about potentials here. If somebody sees a potential to harvest energy in Australia and export it, why not? Because we just shouldn't talk about the transition to substitute the 100% we are using right now. There is a lot more potential energy for us. So we should think about what is after 2035 following German pirates. What is after this transition? We don't just stop there. We go further. We are not in the situation anymore where we actually have to think about how can we limit our energy costs here and there? How can we optimize our production? No, now we can start thinking about again, what can we actually do with energy? With more energy than we have currently available.
That's the pirate way of thinking, right? We're thinking abundance. We're thinking building for an abundant future.
Yes, and then there could be some potentials to harvest more in Australia and export it or whatever. We will see this. I totally agree. And Australia has a lot of potential, not just to. I don't know if this is a good comparison right now, but it's the first which comes in my mind. It's a little bit like Russia, exporting a lot of resources and doesn't have actually a very, and not in our parts, but it doesn't have a lot of industry with highly produced. I don't know if my English is right.
Yeah,
here.
we don't add value. We don't add value in the chain.
Products, not even steel. You know, you have all the things there. You have. Let's talk conventional techniques. You have all the coal, you have all the ore, and you still don't have steel production.
We export wood, we import paper.
Same.
We export our raw minerals, and we export the coking coal to have the steel produced overseas, and then we buy it back. There's a lot of issues there. Another thing I just wanted to touch on in terms of our domestic climate is the cost to the consumer. So, for example, here in South Australia, we're arguably leading the country in terms of renewables, but it did come at a cost. We pay more for electricity from the grid. We don't have to if we invest in solar, obviously, but most people, the market cost is quite high. So when it comes to wintertime down here, it's far cheaper to use pipeline gas than it is to actually use electric heaters. So most of Adelaide will be relying on CSG for winter heating, just because electrical heating can't compete with the price value, and ultimately that's a obvious concern for the end user, the consumer.
Sounds very similar to the situation we have in Germany. Here we have a politically pushed up price for electricity, and the major reason for that is if you look at how the situation was in 2000 and how it is now, you'll see that the large electricity producers have lost about half their market, but they are still making the same revenues. So that is
depressing.
It's totally crazy if you look at the basic numbers. We have cost for solar power here in Germany for large solar farms that are below 3 cents per kilowatt hour, and we pay more than 30 cents for the kilowatt hour as private users. And so the big gap between that is due to large corporations getting quite a big share of that money, and it's mostly by rules that allow the coal plants to run more often than really necessary, and that ends us up in the situation that we are exporting a lot of the renewable power while running on coal power here. And right now, of course, it's a good factor since France needs a lot of electricity. They have the problem that they relied on nuclear power for decades, and they're now in the situation that their fleet of power plants is aging, and more than half of the power plants is offline currently due to scheduled and unscheduled maintenance. And they really have big problems with the electricity. And if we didn't have that Europe-wide grid, they would have even bigger problems, since right now all the neighboring countries are supplying power to France.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Guido.
That kind of mirrors a problem we do have, and it's exacerbated here in Australia because we are so sparsely populated, and that is the national power grids that people rely on. As more and more people invest in rooftop solar and battery technology, I personally haven't paid a power bill in the last couple of years since I installed all that. But they still need to be able to maintain that infrastructure to deliver the power to the people that still need it. And so, as more and more people move to their own renewable setups, it increases the cost per person for anyone still relying on the grid. So the cost of maintenance is still there, regardless. The grid size doesn't get any smaller as people transition. So that is also a factor that we are seeing increasing power prices as people transition, and that's something that I think needs to be addressed through government policy and potentially some sort of a scheme to fund that publicly, so that we don't just see escalating retail prices.
Yeah, definitely. But a really large national grid wouldn't help that situation. I think the right way to go there is to have smaller grids, to have local power supply, which also reduces the amount of infrastructure you need on the larger scale, and only concentrate much infrastructure in areas where you have industry that needs a lot of power. And yeah, probably. Another thing I wanted to mention when we talked about where the production is happening. In Germany, we had the historical development that the Northern Rhine area used to be a really high concentration of industry. And that was because there was abundant hard coal available. And when that stopped, a lot of the industry moved to other places. And right now we are seeing movement of the industry into parts of the country where a lot of renewable energy is available, because it's starting to be a selling point for the companies if they can state, hey, we're producing with so and so many % renewable energy guaranteed. So it's an important decision, or an important factor for them on the decision where to build a new factory, like the Gigafactory of Tesla here in Brandenburg, which is to part based here because there's a lot of wind energy available in Brandenburg. And we just had the decision that Intel is going to build a large wafer factory in Magdeburg, which is also has also a lot of wind energy available. And then there's going to be a large battery factory in the north, also due to a lot of wind energy available. And I think that's a development that we are going to see more and more, and probably there are even industries moving between countries because of available renewable energy.
That raises a question for me, Guido. Like, how... It's wonderful. It's great to see that, and it's great to see consumers pushing in that way. But how do we, as pirates, shape that conversation? How do we try to make it, politically impossible not to resist that? What's our role there to push that, rather than just stepping back and watching, industry maybe greenwash things?
Can I just interrupt for a second? I just wanted to add something before we change to the political party policies. There is a way to think about storage, power storage, batteries, and the power grid the same way. Not because there is storage capacity in the grid. This is totally overrated. But a power line connects to different spots, local spots, while a battery connects to different spots in time. So this is actually kind of the same, as long as you have different potentials that you wanna balance out. And so you can actually do the one or the other thing always, as long as you have different potentials. So for renewables, you could totally have only little islands. You can still connect them in a way if you want, but this is really enough to have sustainable energy. Sorry to interrupt, but before we come to the next point.
No, thanks. I get the vision. It's a beautiful vision. It made me think of you, as you said, Sweden, where maybe you have more wind in the winter and more sun in the summer, and it's almost like they're two different countries, and you built a connection between them, which is your storage. That's a great vision.
And sorry, I was just going to add, one of the largest Tesla battery installations is here in South Australia, and that's because when it came to peak usage, even with our increased investment in solar and wind, at night times during peak times, we used to have several gas powered plants that used to kick in to meet that peak demand. And since the installation of that Tesla battery array, they have not had to do that anywhere near as often. And as you pointed out, that's not transferring over distance; it's transferring over time by allowing the power that's generated during the day to be stored up for those peak evening hours.
Yeah, great example, Dave, and you know, lots of fear about that in the press, and it hasn't eventuated. It's worked really well. That's what we've got to sell, right? We've got to sell this future where these technologies work, and we show them working, and we show, you know, people's lives getting better and grids staying up, and yes, the potential of more independence between those islands. I'm struggling sometimes to put it into words myself. Sometimes I'll see this beautiful potential, and I don't have an image like the one that Fredo just gave us of batteries transmitting through time in the way that, you know, a line of pylons transmits across geography. I think that's the sort of thing we need to sell. We've got to paint a picture of that future, right?
Yeah, another picture you can use is if you're more technically oriented with the pictures you want to paint, is a battery or a storage is like a low-pass filter. You have two frequencies that are not really matched, the demand and the production of energy. And you have the storage as a low-pass filter to flatten out the curves and match them. So that's another picture that you can especially use when people are trying to discuss with you on a technical level that all that is not working because you can't match the production and the demand, and then you can say, okay, I can, but I need, of course, storage. And as Dave already pointed out, the large storage facility at Hornsdale, that's a very, very good example, since that already is working for a couple of years now, and it's showing that it's possible, and it's showing the potential of even saving a lot of money, since you don't need the peaker power plants that run on gas. You just use the solar energy you collected during the day, and that makes the whole thing a lot cheaper. And on top of that, what many people neglect is in the power grid you need a lot of services, so to say, like the frequency stabilization, suppression of short peaks on demand or production. And traditionally, that was done by letting a conventional power plant run just as kind of a ballast on the network, just inertia. And these plants do not really produce any power for the grid. They only stabilize the grid. So you putting out a lot of CO2 for not getting any energy into the network. It's basically you're just heating the wires. That's the purpose of those things. And if you do these services with battery storage, that's a lot more efficient, since they only put in power at the very moment where you need it. and they can correct all the errors on the network, all the noise on the network, without using more power than absolutely necessary. And that also makes it a lot easier to finance these systems, since providing these services to the network is something where you get a lot of money for the kilowatt hour. And if you do a mixed calculation then for the network services and the bulk storage, you end up with having to pay only a few cents per kilowatt hour for the storage.
Power supply on demand.
Yeah.
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 Better than producing too much and just having it fly around the grid.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, here in Germany, we even had one nuclear power plant that wasn't doing anything but stabilizing the network.
And the modern solar plants can even shape, right? As they feed in, they can do their part of the shape. That's my understanding.
Yeah, they can do a lot of these things, and if you combine them with a battery, then they can provide the full range of services for the network. So that also reduces the complexity of the network, since you don't need many different components that do different things, like providing the minute reserve, providing the second or sub-second reserve, providing the frequency stabilization, providing the power factor correction, and all of that can be merged into a single system, into a battery storage with renewable power sources.
Gotta love reducing complexity. On that note, can we go back to Fredo and we'll look at the timeline a bit, because I think that links in my mind to the question of reducing complexity, bringing in this new tech, getting rid of the old, which is it's questions about jobs, it's questions about tech, it's questions about what we keep and what we throw out, and looking at how quickly that's got to happen. Given the time we've got left, I think it's quite an eye-opener.
Absolutely. I remember we wanted to, in the order of things, we wanted to present the policies first, because the timeline is connected to what we are actually, what is our idea from the German Pirate Party.
Absolutely. If we want to talk policies first, let's do that. We sort of jumped ahead. Costs was going to come after policies and avoiding 3 degrees, but I think you're right. It makes more sense if we go, if we jump from talking about the technology, maybe to talking about our targets, because when we're talking about what you first showed us, which was those really wonderful numbers, 25%, 30% renewables, and then you zoom out from the electricity production to the overall power usage, and suddenly you're like, oh wow, Australia is like 7% renewables compared to our total power usage. So that's probably a good lead-in to the fact that as the Fusion Party, we see needing really ambitious targets of maybe around 800% of the current electricity requirements being where you have to aim if you're going to get a modern economy working and industrialized modern society without filling the air with carbon.
To give an idea, for Germany, we calculated we need about more or less the double amount of electrical power that we produce today if all the sectors are changing to only electrical power. So if we want to substitute mobility and heat, then we have to produce about the double amount of electrical power that we do right now. Fun fact here, the total prime energy is less than it is right now, since fuels are not that efficient. So we need less energy, but maybe the double amount of electrical power.
Gotcha. So it's almost like a hidden source of generation that comes in as you switch, because you're getting all this efficiency gain as you go. A little bit like when you switch from internal combustion engine to an EV, and you look at that well-to-wheels efficiency, and it's like, whoa, exactly. Suddenly we're getting a lot more miles for the same amount of input and the same amount of mining and work. Or
yeah, basically,
I get it.
basically with the sector coupling, that's roughly translated from German. With the sector coupling, you basically cut this pie at least in half. So we need less than half the primary energy because the efficiencies are so much higher. If, for instance, for heating, if you switch from using gas or oil to using heat pumps, then you get such a big amount of efficiency gains that it's cutting the whole thing down to make a quarter or so.
Heat pumps are magic, right? Because you get more than 100%.
Yeah,
it's one of the things where you have to be careful that nobody tells you, oh, you're proposing a perpetuum mobile. That's a thing, but the fact is that with a heat pump you can transport something like 3 or 4 times the amount of heat compared to the electric power you put in. So that's really very, very efficient if you compare that to a conventional heater, not electrical, but if you, for instance, use gas, then you have something like 70-80% or so of efficiency. And on the heat pump, you basically have 300 to 400%.
But that's a little bit like your combustion engine car. It produces also a lot more heat than it actually what you can use for mobility.
Please do correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the heat pumps were originally designed as air conditioners to cool the air, and then they figured out that the exhaust coming out of it was producing way more heat. And so they are literally just a reverse cycle air conditioner, and they are very efficient.
Mm-hmm.
But now we wanted to switch to the policies, or
policies. Yes, let's.
Yep. I have questions to lead you in there. I think where I'd like to start in terms of pirate policy really is what is it that we want to nudge? If we're nudging things, if we're saying we want more of this, we want, a tax structure or an incentive system, or we want to move the conversation, what are our things? We've already said, a hydrogen economy is a silly idea. We've said we like the idea of giving people more independence, more localized grids. But what's the thing that we go forwards with? What do we go if a journalist is asking us difficult questions? Where are we going there? Where are we saying this is the future? This is what we should be putting money towards? Putting you on the spot.
Germany, are you going first?
Yeah. Okay. What we have in our program towards this target is that the first thing is we want the fossil energy industry to actually pay their bill, which means that they have to definitely carry the cost of what they are doing, which they are currently not. They have a lot of subsidies in Germany. They have a lot of things they don't have to pay for. A really nice example is the open sky mines for lignite here in Brandenburg. They are pumping groundwater in an amount that is more than double what all other users in Brandenburg are using.
Including Tesla, which was a discussion about that they use so much water.
Tesla is so insignificant with their water use compared to everything else here.
And they pay for the water.
Yeah, it's one of the mines alone that did actually exceed their quota for groundwater pumping, uses about as much water as all of the private households in Brandenburg together. And they are paying nothing for that. And also for
externalities, make them pay for those externalities rather than people paying with lung disease or getting sick. That makes a lot of sense.
It's not even the environmental cost, Jay. It's not even this. This is not even what we are asking for. They don't even pay for the direct resources. They just take the
They're
water.
getting
It's
they're
not about
literally
that
getting
there are
free water. Yep.
external
Yep.
costs like what they do with the environment or with people's health or whatever. It's not even this. It's even more basic.
That's not even priced in, yeah. And
Yeah.
they're also not really paying much for the lignite they're using. They're digging up. It's some small 5-digit figure that they're paying per year for the mining concessions. So that's all things that we say, okay, let's put that on a decent level, have everybody pay for the stuff they are doing. And that will already tip the scale by a lot. And
That makes sense.
then we have a lot of silly regulations in Germany that are hindering the renewables, and we want them all gone. And actually, that's a point where the new government is already doing stuff. In our opinion, they are not doing enough, but at least they've started to move things out of the way. Like hurdles for building wind parks. There are some regulations that they are attacking now and getting out of the way. So that's a really good development, but there's still a lot of things missing. But the positive aspect is that the Ministry of Economy and Climate Change is starting to talk with us, with the working group. So that's a
great.
good development, and I hope that we can build on that and provide them with input to get a bit more pirate flavor into the German politics. Yeah, that's basically.
Actually, can I just bring Dave in on the red tape thing? Oh no, you go.
I just wanted to wrap it up. So basically, what we want to do is we really want to have the basic rules that everybody pays for the stuff they're doing. And we want to enable development. And we are sure that because of the many advantages of renewable energies, they're going to do a disruption on their own if they are allowed.
They will win.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to bring you in, Dave, on the red tape front, because I was wondering about what happened with the 2.5 cents a kilometre EV tax that was being brought in South Australia. Is that still happening?
I'm actually not up with that. I don't know if that's going ahead or not.
Because it's an example of complete insanity, like literally taxing the transition that we're trying to achieve. I think that's the sort of thing that we can easily stand up and go, hey, we're all against that and we're horrified, right?
No, not all. There are probably maybe a handful of people who are actually think that's a very good idea, and they make a lot of profit from this.
But generally speaking, we face very similar challenges to what you expressed there, in that we have massive subsidies for our traditional fossil fuel industries. Our coal mines get a lot of tax exemptions. They get handouts from the government. We have subsidies on our fuel prices and things like that. And they also get mostly a free pass in terms of their water usage and environmental impact. So when it comes to coal, like proper rich black coal, uses a massive amount of water to clean it or wash it before it can be used in a high efficiency coal powered plant. So just the washing of the coal alone is an awful lot of water, and they mostly get a free pass to tap into that, whereas farmers in that sort of vicinity, they generally have to pay for that water. So there's a whole lot of exemptions they get. So what I think, what I'd like to see in terms of policy in Australia is to cut back on those subsidies and start putting the money saved into subsidising renewables to an extent, or at least incentivizing the transition. And I think that'd be really good to see.
Thanks, Dave. And And I think I'd like to just cover one last little spot, which is, it's a very open question really, so I'll do it as a bit of a list so that you can pick or be inspired. If we're talking opportunities, we're talking immediate future, which technologies jump out as the ones that we should be priming or pushing money into? I mean, should we be looking at batteries and storage? Should we be looking at pumped hydro? Should we be looking even at things like smart grids and using supply control, things like that, to up our efficiency and our ability to island and then be more independent from that major grid? Which of those technologies is exciting, I guess, for us?
The simple answer is yes. Basically all of them.
Cheating, but yes.
Basically all of that. Since it's not that easy to say this or this technology is the single one that's going to solve the problems. It's actually going to be quite a collection of different technologies that play together. And they also depend on the local conditions. Like you asked for pumped hydro. That makes sense in some locations. It doesn't make sense at all in other locations.
Especially when you get lithium with it.
No, you're with geothermal power? Yeah, that's a different thing. But pumped hydro, for instance, is a really big thing in Norway, because they have the topology that allows them to do a lot of that stuff. We have a little bit of that in the southern end in Germany. Austria has quite a bit of it, but it really depends on the topology you have available. Same thing with geothermal. Geothermal makes a lot of sense if you have the right geology. If you have the wrong geology, then don't do it, since it's a really, really bad idea if you try to do a geothermal power with, for instance, gypsum in the ground. That will lead to the gypsum swelling up and removing the building sometime, basically. So that's there are examples where such projects went wrong. But there are other examples where such projects run really well, because the geology fits for the purpose. And what Fredo was mentioning, we even have some locations here in Germany that are starting to produce lithium as a side product of geothermal power, because the water that comes up does contain lithium salt. So it's basically a no-brainer to separate that and use it as an additional product that can be basically mined with.
Very cool. So it's a side product and it's extra profit.
Yeah, and it has a minimal impact.
And we talk about a potential which is enough, at least for Europe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's an interesting combination. But basically, it really depends on the locations. You have locations where it makes a lot of sense to have a lot of wind power. Almost every place on the planet is interesting for solar power. Even in Alaska, there are locations where they're using solar power to produce their local energy. And there are even some communities that are trying to become 100% independent and renewable. And their target is to do that by next year or by 24. So that's all feasible if you really want it, and if you don't have stupid regulations that are in your way.
I love the idea. A world with fewer stupid regulations is got to be step one for sure.
It's also a very pirate thing to have fewer regulations and to have those regulations which are in place to be more intelligent.
I have to pick one from this long list of technologies. We identified actually that for the transition to 100% renewables, the real working horse will be the solar power. And if you just would push this, and this is very important, also produce the panels locally, which you can do more or less everywhere in the world, then the rest, the storage, batteries, all of this will follow up anyway, because there's such a pressure then, because it's already the cheapest, and it become even cheaper and cheaper. Then the rest of whatever invest is around this will just follow up. It's like it's like a magnet for investment, actually. So
That makes a lot of
this
sense.
would be my focus if I have to pick one, but it is a mix, and we need all of this. And as you could see in the graphics right now, in the energy mix in Germany, solar power has actually 1.7% of the full mix. Wind is a lot more, but the potential to go further is not as big as it is with solar.
Yeah, I like the point about it being a matter of horses for courses, to use the phrasing there. But yeah, what works for one area is not going to work for another. Australia does produce a lot of lithium, but we export most of that, and then we buy our solar panels from China for the most part. So it's certainly a manufacturing opportunity that we're missing out on currently.
Yeah, and we used to manufacture them here. I mean, the solar panels on my roof came from Mexico, and they came in a great big ship that burnt bunker fuel. It's completely insane. You know, yeah.
The thing is, Germany used to have the biggest solar industry, and then the conservatives kicked in and totally ruined it. The 16 years of Merkel in the government weren't really good for the transition, and did a lot of damage. And we lost, more than 100,000 jobs in the solar industry due to that, and we've already lost...
Within 4 months, just saying.
Yeah.
More or less within 4 months. While we had at this time 20,000 coal miners and have it still more or less.
Yeah. Actually, coal mining industry is way below 20,000 now, and it's dropping further. And they killed 100,000 jobs that had a future for conserving something like 20,000 jobs that have no future at all. So that's totally...
that is very reminiscent of where we are here in Australia, with the tail wagging the dog, and a small number of relatively high-paying jobs that are really a relatively trivial part of the economy being allowed to dominate, because the export earnings from that pay lobbyists very well. That's kind of where we are.
Yeah. One logical step for Australia would be to get battery production into the country. Since, as you said, Australia has a lot of lithium, but currently what's done with the lithium in Australia is it gets the ore gets concentrated to a certain level, and then it is shipped off to Asia. So that's totally stupid. I mean, you have the potential for the renewable energy. You have the raw material there, and you should lure in companies that turn that into batteries. Even if it's a Chinese company that builds a gigafactory in Australia, it's going to use the stuff locally. It's going to help your economy by having the batteries locally, and it's going to reduce all the pollution.
And if it's not for special circumstances, like you want to have it in a car or in your phone, if we talk about batteries for power storage, for instance, that's really no rocket science, because they don't have to be very light, and they don't have to, and they can be a little bit more spacious. So this is no-brainer. Should I continue from here? I'm just looking a little bit on the time.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that leads in fairly well. You know, those are the technologies we have to develop. We know the targets we have to hit to not, be living in a 3-degree world. Let's have a look at the timeline of how that could be made to work.
So actually, our main positions from the last election we had last autumn, we had an election in Germany, was that we wanted to get out of the coal 2024. We want to substitute all the conventional power plants for electrical power up to 2030, and we want to make the transition 100% renewables up to 2035. So that's actually what we identified could be a really reachable timeline. And to put this, what does this mean actually for every year? So the transition, you see it, it's up to 2035. Of course, we did the program last year. Now it's just postponed by a year more or less, but still manageable. This means we would have to substitute 6% of the power production plus storage every year. Yeah, and that's, again, doesn't look that much. So you see here 2024, we could get out of coal usage. What we also said, we have immediately stuck to there is this open field mining. I don't know if this is the right word for the lignite.
Open cast.
So there are still villages with an old dome or a church or whatever, and people living there. They have to move away, and then the whole village would just disappear. You know, we said this has to stop immediately because the already existing storage, your potential is enough. We don't have to kill more villages. And then up to, then we should end with all the coal usage at 2024, which only means we start substituting the coal first. This is the amount we do. So in 4 years or so, we have to substitute this part. Also, coal and nuclear power plants are very bad because they're reacting so slow for the renewable energy at all. So then it kicks always the renewables out of the grid. And then we want to become 100% renewables for the electricity. And as I said before, it's a bit more complicated than this because with the transition we get more electrical anyway. But we want to do this until 2035. And then after 2035, that's actually nothing we mentioned already in the program, but it's obvious. We have.
Sorry, Fredo, can I just clarify there? There's that linked two ideas for me that I hadn't linked before. So between 2030 and 2035, we're going, we're moving towards all primary energy, but part of that is becoming more efficient and the total primary energy use actually dropping, right?
Yeah, because for instance, you cannot just substitute any combustion car until 2030. I mean, you could, but it's easier to say you have a cycle about 5%. They say in a country like Germany that you renew your car fleet every year. So this needs normally 20 years. This will be a little bit more as a disruption transition now, as we see.
Mm-hmm.
My prognosis is in 2 years, nobody will buy a new combustion engine in Germany anymore. It's just, it will be more expensive than an electrical car. And you will be afraid that you will see some big names, not the names, but the companies are dying. Mercedes, VW, maybe not, BMW, all of this, Audi, you will see a lot of them dying because they're not actually, they still have, I don't want to go too deep into this now. Anyway, so this transition will be too fast, but not up to 2030. So mobility and heat too, you have to substitute. So again, heating systems have a transition 3-4% every year. This can also be quicker, faster, but again, you cannot just substitute them. And so this means the process could be end about 2035, but this doesn't include a lot of the power generation anymore then. It's just a substitute that you still use a lot of fossil fuel until this fuel like and gas mostly for the heat. And so this is the last part of the transition. Actually very interesting. because then renewables will be, so electrical power will be so cheap that the last 5 years will get a turbo to change. Otherwise, you just pay 3-4 times more for your. We also have CO2 prices now. Each ton costs then maybe 100 euro. So we will see that filling. You will have an old timer and you can drive it for 20 minutes on a Sunday. You know, this is what you will do as a hobby, but not for your daily way to work or something. Doesn't make any sense.
I've heard the phrase quite often that the transitions happen slowly, and then all at once. And I think this is a really good example of that, where you've got both the nudges that start to increase as you've got fewer and fewer people, who are burning dirty, polluting fossil fuels. You can tax them harder because there's fewer of them, and at the same time, the economies of scale and the increased efficiency as technology improves with batteries and electrical motors and storage and so on, means that the price differential is going to go up and up and up even before you've got those taxes and nudges, and you're going to reach a point where suddenly the incentives are enormous and everyone remaining switches all at once.
We are already at this tipping point right now, but people need to time to realize, and of course there's a lot of, for instance, the bigger car companies in Germany, they're actually put some money on every combustion car they're actually selling. They make no profit at all. Some of them do, because this was also interesting to see last year, the high pricing. It's also VW, Volkswagen, so a car for everybody, guys. They're saying now we're going to only the premium sector. We cannot make any money with the middle class sector or the cheap cars anymore. It's crazy. This transition is a very good example.
Yeah, but that's basically a traditional thing with the car industry. What many people don't know is that the typical car maker does about 30% of his revenue with services and spare parts. And that's also one of the things why many of them are afraid of the electric car, since the number of spare parts that you need goes down, as well as the service amount you need for the electric car goes down.
Simplification again.
Yeah, it's simply the thing, the electric car doesn't have the parts that can fail. So the real parts that are basically consumables on an electric car are the tires, the air filter of your air conditioning, and the windscreen wipers. And that's it. Not even the brakes are consumables on an electric car, since most of the braking is done electrically.
And this is very reminiscent of what we see, right, when you look at energy flowing from solar panel to coming out of my wall.
Yeah.
There's not many moving parts in the chain, right? There's not a great big thing that can blow up and fail.
Right. Yeah.
It's a very real challenge for these business models, because they're going to have to factor in those costs mostly into the upfront sales, because they can no longer rely on generating that much service income in the future from vehicles that are already sold. I mean, there will be the case, obviously, of the batteries requiring replacement, but for most people, they're probably going to buy a new car by the time that happens.
With the current state of the battery technology, it's not even an issue, since with an average electric car of today's standard, you have a battery life of more than 500,000 kilometers. So that's not really an issue. Basically, most of the combustion engine cars have fallen apart way before an electric car really gets a problem.
And you can recycle these batteries up to 95% or even more.
Excellent.
We talked about a lot today about environmental issues and some dependencies from Germany depending on Russia, and we talked about cost efficiency as a nation. We didn't touch so much what does this transition mean for everybody, and in Australia even more than in Germany, it is for a lot of people, especially as an eye-opener these days, very important to become independent for your household, for your house, for your little community, and not reliant on where does my energy come from. By the way, food is the same, housing is the same. I hope there we will see transitions too, but focusing on the energy, this means it's not only that energy becomes cheaper, the money stays in your region. That goes to the craftsman who is installing and maybe maintaining a little bit the solar panels, and not to some sheikh or wherever. Yeah. So this means the value stays in your community, and this is a very important part too. And from a political point of view, of course, if you fuel your own car from the solar roof from your solar roof and from the battery you have at home, if you produce your own food, maybe a little bit, not maybe when you're in the city, but then in an exchange with a farmer, which is close, but in a direct connection. If you got your education in a free information society, all of these things, you become more and more independent from governments and what the state will do for you and all of this. This has a big impact to the freedom of the people, I guess. And so energy is on a big scale, but also on a small scale, which is the big scale for myself then. If you see a small scale, only your household can enable you to become very independent and free. And that's something that's actually the last part of my presentation here. What Walt Disney said, the way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. And that's what we can do. So this was at least my presentation part.
Thanks, Fredo. That really brings us back to the title of our live stream, the empowering. Power Pirates empowering the transition. It's about empowering people to take things back a little bit into their own hands, not be pushed around, and maybe be a bit more than just consumers, as you say, by making your own food, making your own power, and taking your own space back a little bit. That's what this movement is about. And talking about giving the power back, I think it's time to open things to the floor. If anyone wants to put their hands up, anyone who has questions for the panel, hopefully they won't dodge or suddenly log off.
Well, I'm on the panel. I just wanted to touch on the timeline with Australia, because that's something that I think is going to be largely dependent on our political climate. Whoever is elected for the coming years, because there are vastly different approaches between them, and although most of our parties are at least trying to greenwash their approach, and they do have plans in place, I believe if our Liberal Party was re-elected, that they're going to cripple that through the way they implement it, and we won't see full renewables until 2050. Whereas other parties like our Greens and obviously Fusion and Pirates, we're looking to 2030 as a full transition to renewables. So that, I think, in terms of the timeline, that's going to play a big part. Yeah.
That's funny. That's very similar to Germany. Here also those who call themselves the liberals are the ones who are always talking about the free market, but then they want to make regulations that make sure that the old industry gets covered and can continue indefinitely. So it's really interesting. Also with all the issues, when I compare that, I think the problems in Australia and Germany are quite similar, even though the geological situation is maybe different, and we have different demographics, but the basic problem is always boiling down to the point that the people who are making the money with the old technology don't want anything to change.
Yeah, too many
And
invested
it-
interests. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
invested interest and just the degree of centralization as well. The degree of, it's an oligopoly, it's centralized, so the power is in very few hands. Australia is a bit of an outlier with your Gina Reinhardt level of wealth concentrated into extremely few hands. But that
It's
same
exactly the same in
situation,
Germany.
the situation where you have an oligopoly with that degree of power controlling not just the regulations but the flow of money into new technologies, it's very, very difficult to work around unless you can do what you said, Fredo, which is to actually get people to take action for themselves. Nothing else can go around that logjam.
One thing I wanted to add, Fredo mentioned it briefly, is that I always make the connection between available energy and civilization. Basically, communication and energy are the main basic pillars of civilization. The more energy you have available, the more resources you can access. And with communication, it's similar. The better your communication, the larger the structures, the more complex the civilization can be. And so those two factors are always connected. And we are living in a very interesting time with huge improvement, at least possible improvement, in both of these sectors. And with the energy sector, the main point currently is not, as some people say, that we have to use less energy to conserve the environment. No, we actually have to use a lot more energy to make sure that our planet remains inhabitable. But we have to make sure that all of that energy is sustainable. And right now, that is the problem, that we're using fossil fuels as a base of our energy supply. And that's basically killing us and our civilization in not even long term, it's at best a medium term now. And when we can make the transition to 100% renewable, it doesn't make a difference how much energy we use in terms of the environmental impact. But it makes a lot of difference in what we can do. And we can use it, for instance, to do more efficient recycling, to really close the cycles of resources, which is another point that's totally important for the survival of humankind. So when somebody asks me, hey, you're a pirate, why do you're dealing with energy instead of the internet? I'm always answering that both are quite similar. First thing is both use networks. Both are technology. So who is better suited than a pirate to talk about that? And then there's the factor of, it's one of the two main pillars of civilization, and we can't live without it.
If we have a look on, let's say all fossil fuels are fine, they don't have any bad environmental impact, and let's say everybody has enough, we don't have to fight wars for it, distribution is fine, we're still running out of. So we had already probably the peak oil, and this means in terms of civilization we are descending already. At least we are super limited to what we use right now. So this is the border this is the prison we are captured in right now. So if we have access, and we have this, it shines all day from the sun. So if we are not in these limits, then we can have a real pioneer time again, and resources can come not only from our planet. So this is a very interesting time, I agree, but only if we do this transition. Otherwise, we see descending. Not here, but some other time. We can share a link. I saw something on YouTube these days. This was a wonderful animation about the ancient Rome in the year 200. And if you see this, it looks actually very well. The houses, the sewer system, the aqueducts, all of this. And they know about steam engines, they know about alchemy, chemical things enough at this time. They were so close to be like the industrialist London in the 1800s.
So close, so close.
So close. And the only thing they didn't get is actually having a lot of, they had also coal mines and stuff already, to get into this industrial energy process. That's more or less the whole difference, and not the mindset, not the science, not all of this. It's just using a lot of more energy to do all the things you cannot do when you're only reliant on your own muscle. So it can go back, because then there's another, from the same guy, wonderful animation about Rome in the year 400, in the year 500.
Mhm.
And this would
That's
happen the
cheerful.
first time in history. So let's not only stuck into 80s discussions about, I mean, we see even more than in the 80s now what's going on with environmental impact, but let's think also a little bit bigger sometimes. And
It
by the
doesn't
way, I
look
would
like-
really appreciate if everybody who wants to will now activate the cameras, that we see some faces here.
Do I have to unlock people for that to happen, Guido?
I've already done that, so
Everybody can activate now.
just switch on mic and camera.
Let's see people. I just wanted to say, Fredo, as well, that I think that's a absolutely fantastic frame when you point out that even if you take away all the environmental costs, you take away the fact that we're literally boiling the planet alive, forget that, we're still trapped in a world where every year you have to dig deeper for coal. Every year you have to go into worse sub-Antarctic oceans to try and put your oil rig. Every year the costs are going up, the returns are going down, and civilization is going to step downwards unless we can break out of that pattern.
There's a natural
So-
break even, which is very interesting from pure physics. There will be a time, and it's soon, when you have to take more energy to take the energy out than you get from it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, that's how mines get shut down, because they start out very efficient, and then as time goes on, they have to dig deeper, as you said, and they have to access the less potent streams, and the mining costs remain roughly similar, but the quality of coal they produce is significantly diminished. So something else I did want to touch on, just in terms of the transition, is I know nuclear is not a particularly popular subject, but the potential for real fusion in the future, I think, that's going to be a breaker in a few decades' time, because that has the potential to deliver more energy than we'll ever need, very cheaply, very cleanly, very efficiently. So I think that's a really good thing. But also in the interim, over the next few decades at least, because it's going to take a lot of countries a lot more than the next 30 years to move away from their reliance on coal. And I think new clean nuclear reactors still have a place. Australia is a major exporter of that. Unfortunately, since the late 90s, we've had a total ban on researching nuclear energy production and supply for Australia, which I think is a lost opportunity, because while we are exporting so much uranium, we could be exporting the skills and technology that go along with using it if we didn't have that ban. So I still support change to our legal climate here in regards to that. I don't think we need it for Australia. We're so well positioned for renewables, but obviously a lot of other countries are still buying it, and they're still using it. So I think we could maximise that, particularly as we start to export less coal in the future, because that's a big part of our exports, and we're going to have to find new ways to replace that with new exports, so we can still keep our economy rolling along.
The nuclear power plants are far too expensive, regardless of all the waste and all the other problems. But I agree, looking forward to fusion reactors, but we don't know actually when we can have them. But there is one very well engineered, totally overpowered fusion reactor that we can use right now. This is the sun. And so we should just use this until we have the other ones. Yes, then we make another jump there. But as you know, this paradox, it's always available in 20 years. And this is what people are saying since the 60s. So, I'm optimistic about that this time. It's really 20 years, but we cannot wait for this.
Yeah. And with fission power, that's a dying industry. The number of projects for actually new reactors is really, really small. Usually the numbers that are quoted are totally bloated and include reactors which have been abandoned a couple of years ago. For instance, USA, which is a country where you don't really suspect them of having very hard regulations for their economy and for the power industry as well. There are lots of licenses for reactors to build, but there's only a single site left where they have something under construction. That's the Vogtle power plant with 2 reactors. And that thing has run over cost totally out of scale. It was supposed to cost less than 3 billion for each of the reactors. They are now at more than 13 billions for each of the reactors. And it's totally unknown if that thing will ever be finished, because the provider of the technology is bankrupt. That's Westinghouse, and all the other projects. There were 7 other reactor projects have been cancelled due to the investors seeing no chance that they will ever make money.
That's not a political decision. It's a sheer economical decision.
Yeah. So it's definitely a total mistake to put any money into nuclear fission power. That's that's dead, and it's just a little bit of inertia left. And then there are some countries which have the interest of keeping up the infrastructure for their weapons, like UK, like France, and but for power
US,
supply,
China, North Korea. All of them.
Even the US is not really pushing for that.
No, they don't have enough.
Yeah, and with all the other countries that are trying to build reactors for their power supply, are really having a hard time. Like Finland, they have Olkiluoto 3, which was supposed to go into the grid by I think 2009. It's still not in the grid. And it's still unknown when it will be possible to connect it to the grid. They're trying to start the reactor. It's not doing very well. And that thing was also supposed to cost something like 3.5 billion euros. And it did cost more than 20 by now.
All right.
So
Yeah, that's a very fair point. I was thinking more in terms of the environmental impact, because regardless of the costs, nuclear power has minimal CO2 emissions. It's a lot cleaner than coal and gas.
Even
but
in a country like Germany, where we have already a structure, and we just could refit it and refuel it and run it, which is of course a lot shorter than what you could do in Australia.
Yes.
It is fucking too expensive. It is fucking too slow, and you cannot scale it from a couple of reasons. You cannot scale it into these numbers that we need. Also, we're running out of uranium. So this is on the current level, maybe good enough for 40 years, but not even this. And what is left, we know a lot more is left in the mines, but that's not worth to mine it and refine it. since you have maybe here a ton and there a ton. That's not even, you don't want to bring the equipment there for this.
I'm going to be a good neutral moderator here now. So I think we have slightly differing views on whether that technology is a useful part of the transition, but we're all very much agreed that the transition is necessary, urgent, affordable, and doable. I think we've gone an hour and 3/4, just over. I know we didn't say anything about it, but we started with one hope and one fear. I think I'd like to wrap up with one concrete step, one action. Dave, vote fusion doesn't count. One concrete step that we can take. I'll go first. I mean, I live in Lismore, and over the last few years, I've seen people wave lumps of coal around in Parliament and tell me it's nothing to fear, and then I've seen my hometown under 16 meters of water. So, yes, it bloody is something to fear, mate. My concrete action would be that I wish more people would get up off their asses and make connections like what we're doing right now to effect change and get those vested interests scared of us. Fredo, one concrete action.
I would like to bring an example, actually. So I'm coming kind of from a household where we had political discussions when I was a child already, more social democrats at this time, and I don't know. And then 20 years ago, my parents built a solar panel on their house for totally economical reasons at this time, and they thought it's a good idea, it's a good investment for the future. There's some money as a kickback, whatever. And I still tell them, regardless of all discussions and the political talk shows you saw and all the elections you participated in as a voter, this was your single most, by far, political decision that you did and the most impact you had to society by far. And not all of us can do this. Some people have to start maybe talking with their landlords or whatever, but it's these things. As political parties, we try to influence also the parliament and the municipality, all of this. But the things we can do right now with the people around us, that's the thing I would focus parallel, let's say.
Community. Before I go to Guido, I'm going to take that question that I'm seeing in chat. Thanks for posting that up from the YouTube, Dave. We did not, in fact, cover the green ammonia export idea. Does anyone want to cover that in a couple of minutes quickly? It's an interesting tech. My opinion is that you hit those same efficiency problems. Go, Guido.
Yeah, the thing is that generating ammonia from hydrogen is something that's been done for many, many years in large scale. Since that's the basis of our agriculture, of our modern agriculture, since we use it for fertilizer. The Haber-Bosch method, which is the general method for running the so-called ammonia avenues, which produce ammonia, are one of the most energy-intensive industrial processes you can think of. They consume a couple percent of the primary energy use in the world. And producing ammonia, green ammonia, means you're throwing away a lot of energy. So this is a really inefficient process to use it for transporting energy. It is a really good idea to generate green ammonia to replace the ammonia that's currently being generated from natural gas.
Or fertilizer or whatever.
Yeah, for general chemical use. So basically, all the green hydrogen applications should concentrate on applications where the hydrogen is used as a chemical part. Since right now, hydrogen mostly comes from natural gas, It's a really big CO2 source, and that should be replaced first before we think about anything like using ammonia for fuel or something.
Okay, so for ammonia and also for hydrogen, substitution is a great idea, but trying to use it as some sort of storage medium is probably not good.
Yeah, it's at least not at the time being, since we're going to waste a lot of energy. It's always all these chemical transitions are always connected with lots of energy losses. You have lots of heat that are generated, and then there always is a question: what do I do with the heat? Since I don't necessarily need the heat at all, or at this moment, or at this place. So it's going to generate a lot of waste, a lot of loss of energy, and it makes a lot more sense to invest the green energy we have available and we are going to have available over the next years to decarbonize as much as we can, and not try to transition things and continue things like extending the life of combustion engines or something like that. That's something that I definitely reject.
That is very logical. Let's wrap up. Guido, one concrete action for us.
Yeah, one concrete action. That's really hard, since there are so many places where we would have to do changes. So I think the one concrete action is to educate people. Basically do things like we did today, talk about the topics, show how the possible ways into the future are, show the potentials that are available and how much improvement could come from really complete transition, and get people up to speed with what's possible. And one very important thing is many people are talking about technology that we have to develop. Yes, of course, there's lots of technology that we could develop, but we have all the technology available that we need for the transition. It's already in place, it's already in use. We only need to scale up.
It's the will. It's finding the will.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can wrap it up there. Thanks, guys. There's just so much to think about. And Fredo, you mentioned posting some more links. Maybe we can post those under the stream later. And as you said, the presentation can be downloaded as well online. We covered a lot of ground.
We can put the presentation, the event website. Most of us will have the link anyway. I will post it here in the chat too.
Great,
and there you find all the information.
Thanks a lot for that. I think we can wrap it up there. Thanks for the question that came as well from YouTube. I'm not sure who the questioner was, but that was a really good point, because we had meant to touch on ammonia and we didn't. Thanks very much, Guido. Thanks, Fredo, for your...
Are there any more questions from the audience? I'm missing the audience here.
Yeah, same. I'm not seeing any. If there are any,
I see a lot here in the. So for those who see us on YouTube, there are a lot here in the participant in the big blue button.
Yes, that was a YouTuber under the name Gun. I'm not sure who that is, but that was their question.
Yep, I don't think we have any more questions. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Not that I can see on either stream, no.
So it's because you've just answered all the questions in advance, guys. You were too efficient at covering the ground. And yeah, I mean, I think quite a few times during your presentation, Fredo, I had questions, and then 2 or 3 slides later, you kind of covered it off. That's definitely part of it. But also, I mean, it's hard, isn't it? It's this weird mesh of political problem and environmental problem and technological impasse. And so whenever you start looking at the problem, it looks good when you look from the engineering perspective because you see problems being solved, and it looks terrible from the environmental perspective because you see continued swift environmental degradation. And my strong feeling is that both things are true, right? We're rushing headlong into destroying the planet at an incredible speed, but we're solving all the things that we need to solve and developing all the technological answers, and the ways to implement those and to scale them up at an incredible speed as well. It's a race between those two things. And I would also agree with Guido. This is the thing we can do, right? We can push that information out. We can push the possibility of change, of people taking action. And, you know, best will in the world, a lot of people don't know they can. They don't know that that's there as a possibility. If we can get that idea out, things will change.
The thing is that a lot of activists since the 80s, they always sell it in a way like, this is the thing we have to do, we have to suffer for this, we have to go through a dark valley, and then, but it's the thing we have to do for the environment, for our children, whatever. And that's bullshit. Because it will make, from the first day of the transition, it will make your life better, it will make energy cheaper and more available and more sustainable. So this is we have to really push away all this old 80s discussions. And I mostly never talk with people about the environmental impact, why I'm a supporter of renewable energies. It's enough to just bring all the other points, you know, and you don't have to stuck and for sure it's not like, yeah, for a while it will be more expensive and you have to suffer and all of this. And this always comes when I listen to Green Party members or something like this. So that's the message. People can probably then not understand, okay, if it's the cheapest and the best, why doesn't we have it already? Investors should go always, they do. We just saw nuclear power is dead because of the investment goes into the renewables. And they do. But of course, still a majority of people make their money with the already existing conventional energy. And these are probably some of the most powerful people in the world, since they established this power with energy
Yes.
over decades and decades. And
that comes back to what you said, right? There's two pillars of society. Sorry, it was Guido. There's two pillars. You've got information and you've got power. And the people who generate our power, we rely on them. It's
the
very
transition
hard.
of the power is here actually political power, not electrical power, not the technical part, not the economy part. It's the transition of political power back to the people, and that's what people who have already the power are fearing. That's as simple as it is. Decentralized processes are only bad for those who like to be centralized power. That's it.
Absolutely. I think that's the 2-hour mark. I think we should wrap it up on that nice, neat note, because that's exactly right. Let's get away from that centralized power.
Okay.
Let's see some pirate power, and let's make the transition happen. I think that's a perfect wrap up.
Just a
We
very
wish you the
quick
very
comment.
best for your election, we wanted to say.
Sorry, just a very quick comment from Zach Johnson on YouTube. Money seems the biggest problem in this issue. Not sure if it was covered enough in this, and I do agree. It's a deliberately engineered economic problem, and the main thing that we're facing is the cultural attitude towards these things. Things like artificially holding back electric vehicles in Australia is something that we could have done a long time ago, but it just hasn't been made viable for most Australians. But yeah, I'll leave it there.
Let me please close with a quote from Steve Jobs about what we can do. He once said, "Changing the world, one person at a time."
Nice.
Yep. Very nice. Okay. I would like to wrap up there, but I'm not sure what Miles is doing.